Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode on Liftoff PM. I'm Selena, and I'm a Senior PM at Google. Today, we have a special guest, Anant, to talk us through what it's like to transition from big tech into the startup world. Anant, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anant, and I'm a senior product manager at Proton. Before that, I used to be a senior product manager at Yahoo.
Awesome. Thanks for the quick intro, and thank you for joining. We're really excited to have you. The first question I have for you is, in general, like, what were the biggest surprises for you moving from big tech to a startup?
The first thing that comes to my mind, which I loved, is that dreaming big was encouraged and was not met with skepticism. So, and it kind of is backed up with this energy and hunger to do something, which was refreshing. The second part, which kind of builds upon this, has been the lack of red tape. So you can take complete ownership of something that you care about and drive it all the way to the end without having to jump through hoops and sit in long meetings and prove the business case of everything, which is in a lot of cases is made up numbers. So that was a really refreshing change. Now, having said that, fewer checks and balances also means that you can screw up and fall through. So you're going to make sure that, you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's. But it does allow you to live up to your full potential. The example that comes to mind is that the paper attention is all you need was written at Google, with all these amazing people who created the transformer have now all left Google, right? So the lack of red tape and just do things and, which I think I'm good at, is just refreshing and amazing.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think you told me a fun fact that the creators of WhatsApp, even they left Yahoo, right, to create WhatsApp. Is that right?
Yeah. So I don't know if they left Yahoo to create WhatsApp, but they definitely were at Yahoo I think them was there for 9 years.
Okay.
And as I understand, they did work on Yahoo Messenger as part of that. But yeah, they did leave and then they created WhatsApp. I do always wonder that if they had been at Yahoo, would they have done that same thing? If they had built a product within Yahoo, would it have succeeded like it did as WhatsApp?
Yeah. Maybe not. Yeah, that makes sense. As you started working at Proton, you mentioned the sense of freedom, lack of red tape, but also the potential for things to go wrong. Is there a specific work anecdote you'd want to share about that?
Okay, so without going into too much details about what that was, when I joined Proton, I work on the cloud storage, right? And we were obviously building a lot of desktop apps, right? Which is around, you can back up your desktop. And when I joined, we had a big decision to be made on what kind of path we follow. So Microsoft has this path where they will sync everything into the same folder. So you sync documents from your Mac and documents from your Windows, and they go into this one folder called Documents. And Google has a slightly different approach where you kind of decide for a computer where things want to go. And there was a decision. It's a big one because once you go down one path, it's a kind of type 1 decision. And I was allowed to make the decision based on the vision that I had set for the team without having to jump through hoops and going and proving to people, because this is almost impossible to prove, which is better, right? So I had to make that decision. Now, when we were launching some of the said products, I assumed that some things would just be in place, like, the coordination between marketing, war room setup, etc., which obviously wasn't the case. And again, also probably unique to my team. It was kind of new. I had just joined as a product lead and getting things in place. And then few things fell through. Given the energy, people picked up stuff and got us over the finish line, but I had assumed, I put it in the launch calendar. Everyone would be aware of it and everything would be ready. So yeah, that was a hard learning. So didn't make that mistake again.
Yeah, that's a great example. At Google, I find myself doing that too a little. It's like, we have these structures in place and a lot of it is automated and taken care of. And when you don't have that, it's like, oh, yeah, there's a reason that this was automated, So that's a great example. Sort of going back to what you were talking about earlier in terms of reaching your full potential. Could you tell me a little bit more about what you think big companies get wrong, in general, related to red tape, Any example you'd want to share?
So I'm going to refer to physics, and this is probably because everyone I work with, or most people I work with, are physicists and were at CERN. So that's been impacting the way I talk now. So what we refer to is, and the analogy will give us, that big tech companies tend to forget the laws of physics, right? The bigger something is, the more force and or time the force is applied for takes to kind of change its direction, right? You would imagine that in an ideal case, companies would evolve in a way where they're always taking into account the next big opportunity, what part of their business is, not going to last long and it's not going to survive the next generation change in technology, but that's not ideal. In the sense that it won't actually end up being that way. So what's going to happen is they're going to find one thing and it's going to work really well and then it's going to go all in on that. And then eventually when something different comes along, like LLMs or blockchain or say what, it's got a paradigm shift and going to hit a brick wall, right? And then they need to reset and move a massive ship, right? And that's where the laws of physics come in, right? You need to apply either a lot of force or a moderate amount of force for a moderate amount of time for it to actually change directions, right? You change people's mind, change culture, and so on and so forth. And that is not easy. What big companies end up doing is, that, at least what I've observed, is shareholders will come and change the entire leadership team and strategy every year or two. I've lived through this personally with like 4 owners of Yahoo when I was there, and it always happened, right? So it meant like we could never actually change direction. We were just doing the same thing over and over again without getting anywhere. Having said that, some companies I have seen or read through and had the privilege of meeting the people who were there at that time, which have done a good job at this. Netflix comes as an example, and if someone wants to go deeper, they can read the book, No Rules, which is amazing, and talks about this. And if I remember my book correctly, there are 2 things I would call out. One, in the book, it mentions that Reed Hastings at some point wanted to resign, and the board said, no, we trust you to do the right thing, and we want to give you more runway to turn this around. So that kind of confidence being put on in you, from our board can work wonders, not only for you, but for the team. And second was, if I remember correctly, was that during their transition from the DVD phase to the streaming phase, apparently they did not have the DVD SVPs and VPs and directors in a lot of their planning sessions, because they literally wanted to make sure that they do not let the current business impact how they're thinking about the long term and end up making short-term decisions, right? Just having that runway and foresight is just amazing. And I think most big companies do not realize this until they hit the brick wall. You could be lucky. I mean, if Apple hits the brick wall tomorrow, it has, $200 billion in the bank. That's enough for them to survive for a few years and make changes, but not true always and for all companies. And I think this phenomena is not unique to just big tech companies. It applies across. And I am a football fan. That is what we call it here in Europe. And I've seen the same phenomena being applied, or same stuff happen in football clubs as well. So the last 5 years, the 2 clubs which have done really well have been Manchester City and Liverpool. And compared to Manchester United, which is arguably a bigger brand name, and Chelsea and Arsenal, the one thing that differentiates these 2 from everyone else, given all of them have spent $1 billion, is that they did not change their managers for 5 years. Same manager, Jurgen Klopp and Guardiola, just doing their thing. They had some bad seasons, but because it stuck around, they both delivered outsized returns. So that's one thing I want to call out that I think big tech just gets wrong, or big companies get wrong. The second, and this one is more personal and close to my heart, is that the mission is no longer the starting point of a conversation. And I would bet good money on this. I've seen this happen firsthand. That if you just went around and asked people, hey, could you word for word tell me the mission statement of your company and your org? Most people will not be able to do that. They will get close enough, but they won't be able to do that. And second is, if you go and look at people's presentation and strategy document for every quarter, is the first line, the mission statement. The first line start, which is at Proton True, is anything we start is like building an internet privacy is the default. And then we start the conversation. And obviously we will talk about revenue and we will talk about KPIs like DAUs, etc., which is true. We need that to sustain a business. But that's not where we start the conversation from. And I felt that sometimes just lose the soul. And this is personal to me again, which is, I don't want to work for company X. Here's a problem that interests me. And our company is basically a group of people who care about the same problem. They said, hey, we're going to pool our resources and time together to solve that. And I feel like that gets lost as the company scales because shareholders take precedence and, revenue becomes king. And that's just kind of isn't good to sustain it for a long time.
Makes sense. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Like at Yahoo, at the end, the founders were like kind of involved as like, they would consult sometimes, but eventually like, with Verizon and all of that, like it definitely fell by the wayside. With Proton, right? Like it's led by like the founding team. I'm curious, like what's been your biggest observation in working at a company that's still led by the founders versus not, sort of, following up on what you said about Reed Hastings, being able to follow through, like these football clubs being able to follow through.
Two things come to mind. So one, and I think I need to like caveat this, Proton is also self-sustained and self-owned. So it does not have VC backing at this stage in its life. So there is none of that pressure, right? Even if you're founder-led, you're a startup, you might have VCs, who want a return on investment. So that doesn't exist. So it does make life much easier for us. So I'm giving the caveat, two things that jump to mind. One is just the way everything is talked about at the company, which I'll go back to. Everything starts with the mission statement, right? You're holding the conversation, you're talking about teams, working on with pride, right? Devoting a significant amount of time to preserving democracy, which is kind of the mission of building an internet privacy default by enabling VPN services in authoritative states, right? And working through the night on delivering that. It moves no KPI whatsoever, right? Especially because in a lot of these countries where, internet has been blocked, people cannot pay because the payment routes are blocked as well. So they're essentially using the service for free. People are dedicating their time and effort into doing that because every question starts is, okay, we want to build into this default and then, okay, what can we do about it? That triggers, it is really helpful. The second part, because founder-led, is it's always long-term thinking. The commercials only start with, okay, we want to be here in 2025 and we want to be here in 2030. What decision are we making? Like when you make a decision for a quarter as well, the question comes up in the planning meeting, how does this help us in 2025? And how does it help in 2030? Which I never saw, or at least was in the meetings where this question was asked when you pitched an idea.
Like, yeah, that makes sense. That's great. Like I definitely can resonate. And for those who are listening, Anant and I used to work at Yahoo together. So yeah, I can definitely hear what you're saying. Sort of in that vein, like how do you balance and practice like some of, the growth KPIs that you all have, revenue KPIs that you have with these sort of like more ethical questions? I'm curious.
You mentioned growth and ethics and the balance between the two. So I think the question comes down to, or the answer lies in how we define growth, right? Like if you just throw growth out, it's like, okay, people to know revenue or ARPDA or ARR, one of those terms, but that doesn't have to be growth. Right? And I will maybe give an example, is a little bit outside of tech. So it's easier to understand, at least for me. I also read a book about it recently. Makes it easier for me to understand. Is GDP. Right? GDP is the well-established growth metric for countries, and right, it's what they communicate to the politicians talk about that to the citizens, and you see a graph in Financial Times or New York Times, and it always like, oh, X country is better than Y country because it has a higher GDP, right? But what it completely misses out is human well-being, especially when GDP growth in almost every country comes at the cost of some individuals in that country. It doesn't become better for everyone. And a great example is climate change, right? Like when you just hammering on GDP, you will not take into account climate change, which is bad for everyone. And then you also do not see countries like Norway or Finland and some Scandinavian countries where GDP is not as high as that of the United Nations or China or India, other places. But I would argue forever, basically, that they're better places to live, right? In terms of access to healthcare, access to education, in sort like number of people who are in prison, it is better on all fronts. So I think that comes back, taking it back to a conversation where how do we balance growth and ethics? So like look at growth in terms of, which is what we look at least in my team, is how many people have adopted a privacy first product, right? That is the growth metric, and that is what we want to accelerate. And that's the counter. So we have this thing where we're like, okay, how many people? And you say, okay, 1%, 2%, or 3% of our population. We aren't at single digit, we're still at 0.01, but that's the goal. And by keeping that in check, it just allows ethics to always just work itself in, and it's not a dilemma or a friction between the two. Yeah, I mean, revenue consistently become hard because obviously we need to make money to continue working on this mission. No one's just giving it to us. But by starting with mission statement and by defining growth as, okay, how many people in the world have we helped migrate to a more healthy version of internet? It kind of helps us avoid the ethical dilemmas that pose themselves. I think what happens is if you don't have a definition of growth that aligns with ethics, everyone is just 0.1% evil, in a manner of speaking. Like, no one's perfect, and it just compounds over time. Everyone makes, okay, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine, and you put it all together, and you're in a situation which is not good. You're with it.
I really like that takeaway, that PM lesson, and that like the way you define metrics really matters. Everything follows from there. And if you bake it into your North Star, it just, follows. That's a great takeaway. If it sounds like, you're having a great time at Proton, there are a lot of like good things about working at a startup. If we sort of flip that on its head, are there any things that you think startups are doing wrong?
I feel like the entire PM community will hate me for saying this, but I do feel that a lot of startups, including sometimes the Proton, what they get wrong is chasing product market fit, right? Question that comes up is like, do you want to build something people want or something that improves society, right? Like at Proton, like encrypted email is harder to use because you have to give up a lot of amazing features that other email providers have, because you can access data, do a lot of cool machine learning, etc. right now. And we could just remove them, right? Be like, hey, just trust us with a business model, right? But you have to give that up, and that we come out of the fact that you want to build something people want or something that improves the society. So and it kind of weaves itself into, if you chase what people want, you kind of are appealing to their primitive brain, which would mean that you end up building sugary drinks, right? Which mean you would do things which give you a dopamine hit, right? At the end of the day, which is not good for us, right? Our technology has evolved way faster than our biology. So if you go in the direction, we will not end up in a good place. So I think chasing product market fit in the way it's generally defined is probably not a good thing. A lot of products fall into that category, a lot of companies fall into that category. Having said that, I think a tweak to that approach is that instead of chasing and building things that people want to buy, could you tweak the product in a way that it makes it easier for people to adopt it, right? Which is a slight difference. So, you're chasing a product market fit, but you're not chasing product market fit in terms of building what people want, but in terms of tweaking and changing the UI, the UX, the flows, etc., the story behind a product, so people find it easier to adopt it in their lives. And you could use gamification for both, for building healthy habits, getting up and going for a run every morning. And you can also use it to get people to just scroll endlessly for hours at a time, right? So that's a small difference, but I think it makes big impact on the world. I think that's where sometimes startups can get it wrong.
That is an interesting take. At Proton, how how do you all sort of adopt this mindset of like not pursuing product market fit?
Again, it just comes down to the mission. It's like every statement, every conversation would start with a mission, and that would guide the discussion. And it just comes out an anchor, right? Like in conversation, we all have anchor bias, and we're using it for the good. And you anchor yourself on that, and then you move along so it doesn't end up in that state. So obviously, we have put in a few things in place. So as a caveat, right, we own the company. All the employees own the company, so there's no VC pressure kind of deviate your way from changing revenue growth, etc. It is very community-led, so we have very local community. We are open source. So everything we do, every client that we have built is available to the public. So anytime we would try to do something, the community will scream and, we have the course correct. So we just don't go there. And those kind of things in place have helped us. I mean, also our business model is basically putting your data, which means that anything that goes against that, like weakening encryption for something else, will not fly and will destroy the business. So there are things which help Proton in its current state kind of keep true to where we want to go.
Makes sense. It's interesting. I think like startups are obviously like generally ambiguous. In your case, because it's not VC backed, because you're still founder led, because you don't have these external pressures. I can imagine it's even more ambiguous, right? You don't have that external pressure like forcing you in any direction. Do you have any advice for folks coming into the startup world generally on how to operate in a highly ambiguous place?
Yeah, the ambiguity, that's a fun one. So and I think we talked about this earlier, but the thing which I would stress is, especially if you're coming from a more established company, is do not expect a process to save your butt or guide you. They do not exist. So you talk to people around you and talk a lot, especially as a product manager, talk, to find all the gaps through which things can fall, and you kind of have to do it proactively, right? And I say, like, I kind of fell in the trap early. Thankfully, the team which was there was helpful and got us over the line. They shared some learnings. I want to do this again, sharing with everyone who joins my team. First thing, so you cannot rely on process. Now, having said that, the first instinct that I also had was, okay, I've been at a place which is great at launching products. It's very well established. People don't stress out. Things go smoothly. So let me take that process and put it in, right? Which is not a good idea, because this lack of red tape and lack of process is not a bug. It is a feature, because startups do need to move fast, right? And they do need to be flexible to change things as things come, because they would not, in most cases, have people for every position and every role. So some people are doing multiple things, and they need that kind of flexibility, right? So I would not recommend creating a process before you start working on something. So the absolute red tape is a feature, not a bug. What I would suggest, what I've worked well for me, was once you have done that set thing, right? You've gone in, you've launched something, everyone struggled and worked really hard to get that over the line. Then you document what you did. You sit down with your team and you ask them, okay, what do we think we can tweak here? Like, okay, we can do this and this, we should have this call earlier in the cycle, or we should have like postmortems earlier, or, we should involve marketing this time, or we should check things outside of VPN, and not on corporate VPN, because sometimes, things can break in production, so on and so forth. And that helps people kind of understand, okay, why this is needed. And they've already done it. For them, it's not a process. Then it's like, oh, now I have a cheat sheet on how to repeat something. And that approach, they come down to, like, if you approach it that way, basically, it's easy for people at the company to adopt it, and they don't see it as red tape. They see it as accelerating their approach. Because next time you do it, they just go, want to think about it.
Yeah, it's more like a guide or like best practices playbook sort of thing. That makes sense. I guess that makes me wonder, like, hypothetically, in a world where, your team grows a lot, like Proton is growing a lot, at what point would you want to instill some of like the big company red tape or, process, if at all? I'm just curious, like, what's going to be the alarm in your head that signals to you it's time?
I think, so right now I meet with every single person in my team. It takes a significant amount of time, but I just do it once a month. I basically meet everyone. I think at a point where I'm not able to meet everyone in my team, that is when I would like to put in some kind of process. Because at that point, there is a communication loss. I'm not just getting it directly from the person who has the most context and is making the decisions in the trenches. So I think that would be a point in time where I'd be like, okay, I've reached a point where I can't just do one-on-ones 24/7. So I need to put in a process where some kind of information bubbles up so that everyone has the right context and you can make the right decisions.
Got it. And by your team, are you talking about the PM team or like the broader cross-functional group with like Eng and
Basically everyone. So includes engineering, design, marketing, social, when it comes to it, like sales, etc.
got it. Yeah, I know you're in a lot of meetings now. It makes a lot more sense. Cool. So maybe one parting question on this topic. I think a lot of folks, recently are transitioning from big tech into the startup world. If you were going to give some advice to someone transitioning from big tech to startup, as many people are doing today, what would those biggest differences be? And then the second question is like, what advice would you give on how to like address and prepare for those biggest differences?
The advice I would give to people who are transitioning, and I know in the current environment, there are a lot of reasons why people are doing this, is it's a fresh start, right? So find something that truly inspires you, like forget the brand name. You don't always need something fancy on your CV. Obviously, in this example case, people are coming from a bigger company, so they already have that check, box checked. Find something you're passionate about, something that really resonates with you. Because I found this for myself, I sleep better. I might be working harder because it's a startup and there's a lot more to be done, but I do sleep better. So that would be one advice I'd give people. Like, forget the brand name, look at a company mission statement, talk to the founders. A lot of founders might have, they might have a blog post and they might have shared their story of why privacy is important to me, like why food security is important to someone or why clean energy is important to someone, right? So find that thing and find if the team actually believes in it. I would also recommend, it's not true for my case, but look at the VCs that are funding the startup you're going to, right? Because that will tell you a lot. Are these VCs into, just like pump and dump, or are they in for the long haul? How have been there in previous companies? Like, have they supported mission-driven companies through thick and thin, or have they not? So find all that stuff. So when you're making a decision, you can rest easy. And when you're working, it's just more fun, right? You're working on things you're passionate about. Not only that, when you go to a company in that kind of time, in that kind of mind frame, and if everyone at that company went in that kind of mind frame, you will surround the people who are equally passionate, right? One thing that I've come across is that obviously everyone wants A players, right? A big part of being A player is that you're passionate, because you can only push yourself so much through discipline. At some point, you just need that extra adrenaline, which comes because, you got to look at it at midnight because you're just like excited about it. That's one thing I would definitely recommend people. A second thing when kind of making the transition is being very open and honest about what you expect and what your plans are in terms of how you see yourself working here and how you want to contribute to the mission or what you want to get out of it at the end of the day. Especially when you're going to startups, it's much more easier to end up having a round with the founders or someone, one of the early employees at the company. And because again, there's less red tape, so you're not just going to jump around with HR meetings and other, and you can just openly ask them about it. Especially if you go into a startup where the founder is still there or is still there in a position of seniority, they want people who are passionate about the mission, and you can ask them about it and see if you connect well with them. Which is, or lead me to another point, and that is you should connect well with the founders. Just because a startup is aligned with something you want to solve, there are 100 companies doing privacy, there are 100 companies doing clean energy, and so on and so forth. You might not judge every founder, right? Their approach might be slightly different, the personality might be slightly different. And given it's a startup, you're going to have a lot of interaction with them. So it makes a lot of sense. You spend the time talking to them, asking them questions. Generally, if they feel you want to bring a lot to the table, they'll be more than happy to answer them because they want you there. Because they're obviously coming from a bigger company, and you obviously can bring a lot of experience and exposure and connection and other stuff. So I would say make best use of those things.
And follow up quickly there, like maybe not so much in like sussing out a potential founder, but maybe sussing out, new teammates. Like, how do you differentiate between someone who's charismatic or someone who's like truly passionate about the cause?
Yeah, this reminds me of a quote, which was, you can't impress them with brilliance, dazzle them with bullshit. Everything. The thing I remember like talking to a few people was like why they joined. One good clue of this is how early in the company's like lifespan did they join. The earlier someone joined, the more likely they're more mission driven, because obviously you're not going to be getting $100 million on day one. No, people who join earlier generally have significantly low base comp, even if they have higher equity. So that's a good way. Like if you're talking to people and you see a lot of early people are still there, to get that. When you're talking to people, what I have found a good question to ask is, pretty sure an example from your life where you lived this mission outside of the context of this company. Example I will share without giving names. One of the team members that I have on my team used to attend he explained to me, PGP parties. This was people meeting in person to share their public keys with each other. So they could maintain privacy. Before, you had this automatic transition. So I was like, okay, sold. I mean,
It's awesome. Cool. And not to put you on the spot, but maybe a little bit, what's your story?
The way I looked at privacy and the way I wrote in my cover letter of why I want to work on privacy was based on its impact on democracy, right? Given the country that I've come from, and given the current state of the world, the democracy index for most countries is going down. Moving from democracies to flawed democracies. And a big part of what sustains democracy is the ability to talk about things openly and freely. Privacy is where it really matters, because without privacy, journalists get killed. And internet is turned off. And people can't communicate and talk to each other without fear. And third-party working, email, and VPN have been instrumental. One of my happiest memories at Proton was sitting in the office and meeting people from some international organizations, without giving names, where they talked about how they had to use our products instead of some of the other bigger names for their investigations, because they needed that kind of end-to-end encryption and ability not to track, etc. And given where I see the country I come from, and my parents were in the armed forces and dedicated a lot of their life to keeping it safe, I would like to make sure that I contribute to that legacy.
That's a great answer. Okay, so maybe just to wrap, I know you're really big into reading. And so if you were to recommend, maybe one or two books to someone who's moving from big tech into the startup world, which might they be? I know you mentioned one, but yeah, super curious to hear what you say.
My favorite book of all times in like business strategy kind of thing is Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0, which apparently is also a Reed Hastings reads every year. Actually, that's what it says on the cover. The second book, which I think is a recent one I would recommend, is Build by Tony Fadell. I think he helped build the iPhone.
I heard that one, yeah.
And he talks about even at Apple, like how it was like a startup and the pace, the intensity, and the ambitiousness that was put in place. And you should expect intensity at a startup without the safety net. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Good to know. And yeah, for those who are listening, Anant has the best book recommendations. Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0 is very good. So you should read it. But thank you so much for being here. I love catching up with you. And again, for those who are listening, good luck in your transition. And we'll see you next time.